Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this weird little guy right here. This is the Sandrin Knives TCK version 2.0. First though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Sandrin Knives for sending this guy along. Sandrin is a company that's actually relatively new on the scene. I think Blade 2017 was really the first I heard anything about them, but their big claim to fame is that they're doing tungsten carbide knives. And they actually sent this guy to me, and they said, hey Nick, you want to check one of these guys out? I said, absolutely, yeah. I sent him my full disclosure, told him I was talking about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly, might be a gem, might be junk. Nevertheless, they sent it along. What we do have to assume, though, is this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm absolutely doing my best not to let this affect the nature and quality of my review. But nevertheless, there is that guy. Next thing, let's do a little bit of size comparison, because this is a very strange-looking knife. I mean, like, proportionally, it's very unusual. Here it is against your Spyderco Delica. Here it is against Spyderco PM2. So in terms of sharpened blade length, we're actually exceeding the PM2 by a decent margin here, although it is a markedly smaller and slimmer knife than either of those guys. Then here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2, right here, which is that. And then actually I do want to compare it against one other knife from Sandrin, and that is the TCK version 1, where we can see the blade is largely identical. Maybe there were slight differences too. Well, I mean, there's one difference at the tip there. But in terms of blade size, they're very, very similar. In terms of handle, though, this guy is about the same thickness, maybe a slight bit thicker. But yeah, there you go. That's your size comparison there. And then actually, like I said, this is the version 2.0. Right here is the version 1. The version 1 was a liner lock knife. It was a tip down only sort of thing. You know, there were a bunch of things here versus this little guy, which is a slip joint style knife and is tip up only, or I'm sorry, well, yeah, it is tip up only. And it's just a very, very different sort of affair. And so let's go on ahead and, and then finally, actually, I should just go ahead and introduce the elephant in the room, which is this material right here. This is a tungsten carbide knife. This is a tungsten carbide. It is an actual, it's not steel. That's the weird thing about it. Like, this is not a steel blade. This is tungsten carbide through and through. It's being run at 71 Rockwell hardness, which is pretty intense, and has some pretty impressive qualities. So we'll go on ahead and we'll talk about that blade a little bit here. But for now, that's kind of the unusual thing about this, and that's the name of the TCK, is it's tungsten carbide knife. There you go. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife right here. So on the good side, to start with, this is super easy to carry. So, I mean, take a look at the thing. It's freaking tiny. I mean, at some level, this knife is smaller than the Spyderco Delica. You know, it fits entirely within, it's okay, slightly taller. But it is, very, very small. It is also very, very slim. Very, very slim little knife right here. And so that makes this guy absolutely very, very straightforward to carry. And in terms of weight, although tungsten carbide is actually heavier than you'd expect, we're coming in at 2.2 ounces for a blade length of about 3¼ inches. So, yeah, this is real easy to carry. This is a sort of drop it in your pocket and forget about it sort of knife, and I appreciate that very much. Next thing, this is a slip joint knife. This is, something that you're going to want to keep in mind, but I'll say that the action on it is actually quite good for a company's very first foray into slip jointitude, in that it has a very good positive walk and talk. You have a half slow sort of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It's sort of like a half stop, but it doesn't have the same aggressiveness as most half stops, and then a very strong bias towards closure here. It's actually quite well done, and the most important thing is that particularly with your thumb up here, this is quite secure. I really would struggle. I'm having to put a fair amount of force down on this guy to actually pop it loose, and that's impressive. So I have to say, I'm appreciating the slip joint action of this guy. Slip joints aren't going to be for everybody, but this is not one of the ones where I felt like, oh God, this is dangerous. And frankly, even if it does come loose, because it has a sharpening choil area right in here, yeah, you might get nicked by the corner of the blade right there, but it's not going to be quite as bad as some of them where it's, way high off of there, and it's just a finger amputator. So, of course, safety is something you want to keep in mind, and use at your own risk. But I feel like as far as slip joints go, this one's actually a little better than I expected it to be. And that hasn't felt like a major problem for me. Next thing, there are some really nice details on this. Not only is there a nice sort of mirror DLC, I'm not quite sure what the coating is exactly, but it's a very nice mirrory polish to it, which is a beautiful thing. But also you have this nice little hole pattern on the blade that you can see there. This is actually based in the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, etc. That is the... That is a natural sequence that is produced by, adding the last two items in the C. Anyways, it goes. The Fibonacci sequence is a really cool thing. And so you have two 1 millimeter holes followed by a 2 millimeter hole, then a 3 millimeter one, then a 5 millimeter one, and they're spaced 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. It's a little thing, but it's kind of a cool thing. And it's not something I've seen elsewhere. But more importantly, it actually has a functional purpose in that it makes the knife very easy to extract, because you have a series of holes here that actually do make some sense. Whether this is better than your classical opening hole or anything like that, I'm not going to take a strong stand on, but it sure as heck is cool. And it's a piece of personality that I feel like, they could have very easily skipped, and it might have lost something for it. So I appreciate the fact that they're willing to do these opening holes generally, but more importantly, that they're willing to give them a bit of personality and a bit of, frankly, nerdiness. That's kind of a nice thing. But you've also got other nice details here. For instance, the backspacer on this is a nice red steel. I don't know exactly how it's reddened and whatnot, but that's definitely, it's attractive, and you can see here, you see it's completely coated. It's not just the very top of it. So that's a nice thing. And even just like I said, the blade finish on it is nice. This is actually, it's profoundly nicely done. Little chamfer on the edge of the pivot screw there. Nice, I think it's engraving. It feels like an engraving of some variety. But either way, I am pretty impressed by some of the details on this guy. There's not a whole lot going on here, but what's going on here was well thought out. And that actually brings us to the next point, which is that this is a very unique knife. I'm looking around the modern knife market, there really isn't a whole lot that feels like this. Putting completely aside the blade material, this kind of blade stock thickness is absurdly uncommon in the world. I mean, if we put this up against, here we go, the Spyderco Chaparral in FRN is, well, actually in any of them, is sort of on the lower end of modern production knife blade stock thickness. And what we see here is that this is remarkably thinner than that. This is a very, very, very thin blade. And you know what? I appreciate that. That's unusual both in the modern market and just in life in general, and makes for a very compelling cut. And just overall, I mean, it's a thoroughly modern slip joint. It's weird. It's super weird. And I appreciate that even before we get to the materials. Then finally, on the good side, I appreciate how much of a step up this is from the TCK 1. This is a knife that I love very much the blade, but the handle left me completely nonplussed. This felt like a very good way to hold a blade. Maybe not a very good way, but a good way to hold a blade, whereas the second generation here, this is actually a pocket knife. This is a knife that I could very easily and happily carry, whereas this guy had so many ergonomic issues. It had so many just functional carry issues. It has no detent at all. It's just, and that's why it has to be tip down only, and it's tip down only, which is not great. And the clip was... This knife was very, very much a life support system for a blade. This is a pocket knife. This is a piece that I can see somebody very happily carrying for a good long time. And so that is that's a big thing. And for me, to see this level of refinement and improvement in a single generation, going from something that is really not that awesome, although the blade was still amazing, to something that is actually a very nice little functional tool, that's spectacular. And so to me, all of that is the good. So there was a huge step up from version 1 to version 2. The uniqueness of the knife is definitely out there. I like very much the details on this guy, like with the Fibonacci holes and whatnot. It's got a very nice walk and talk to it, and it is super easy to carry. But of course, what's great about this knife, and the news about it, so to speak, is exactly this blade. Although it is a fingerprint magnet, 100%, it is absolutely wonderful in that it is very, very thin. No matter what material it is, blade stock that is this thin is going to be very nice for cutting a lot of materials. But more importantly, it is also a very, very slicey blade, and it is got an amazingly thin little edge at the bottom there, which is great, and it's tungsten carbide. Now, I'm not sitting here telling you that tungsten carbide is the only knife-making material, or that, frankly, I would prefer a lot of my other knives to be in tungsten carbide. No, this is a very purpose-built tool. But this knife is what it's kind of best known for, two things. because it's not steel, it doesn't rust. Like literally, rust is not on the chemical menu for this guy. It's not going to be a thing, but more importantly, the edge retention on it is spectacular. My buddy Pete over at Cedric A to Gear and Outdoors has done for a while now a series of cutting tests with knives, and one of the ones that he did was this first generation of this guy, which has a blade that is basically the same. This had the highest number of cuts for any blade steel. Rex 121 with a very specific edge geometry was able to match it, but still, this guy has 1,540 cuts. And of course, these are one person doing testing. I encourage you to think about, this kind of performance more holistically. But just as a benchmark, this guy got 1,540 cuts versus 1075 for Maximet, which is generally acknowledged to be among the higher end performing steels. And then for the very best formulation of M390, we were looking at about 810. So this is a very, 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 very good performer in terms of edge retention. To get a better sense of what tungsten carbide here actually is, I actually recommend that you read, I'm going to link down in the description below, a post by Larin Thomas, or Larin, I'm not quite sure how he pronounces his name. But either way, talking about at least speculating about what this tungsten carbide actually is. And he gets really deep into it and about some of the downsides to it, because it isn't going to be the most tough, sort of thing. But at the same time, I've been very impressed by the performance of this. I have not been able to meaningfully dull this knife with use. And that's a really pretty impressive piece. So, to me at least, what's great about this 100% is the blade. Not only that it is super thin and slicey, but that it is also a completely different material with amazing edge retention and a complete lack of ability to rust that seems to work quite well. On the bad side, to start with, tungsten carbide is not going to be the best all-around knife material. There are a whole host of people in the world I would not recommend it to. And there were a couple of reasons for that. I mean, we'll talk about sharpening in a bit here, but the biggest one is that the toughness isn't quite as high. If you get into any kind of a task where you're trying to bend this knife, where you're trying to flex it, and although it does have some flex to it, it really isn't going to be, it's going to crack much sooner than a conventional knife steel. And of course, you should never use a knife for prying. It is a cutting tool, not a prying tool. You should get a prying tool. But nevertheless, I believe that this is not going to be the best choice for a lot of folks simply because of that toughness issue. If you need absolute edge retention above everything else, this is a very, very solid approach. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind. It is also a slip joint, and it is the case that slip joints aren't necessarily for everybody. Maybe a backlock version of this might be compelling in the future there, and I'll also offer some of the same benefits, but that's definitely a thing. It is also not really something you can one hand open. I mean, maybe if you're super skilled or if you wanted to. No, I don't see that happening. The spring is too strong. So it's definitely not a one-handable knife. So that is something to keep in mind. Next thing, the coating on the handle here, you can see that there are a couple of little dings, and I gave this guy a little, actually a fair bit of carry by my standards, before I ended up doing the review, just to make sure that I was saying it's a nice thing, right? But you definitely do see a little bit of wear and tear on this coating here. Next thing, the half stop on this guy. On a lot of conventional slip joints, you get a strong stop there, where there is a flat surface there that really actually stops the blade. This guy really has something more akin to a half slow. Like the blade slows down halfway through the range, and that's fine. It works well. It's a safe thing. But it is definitely not a half stop in the classical sense that some slip joint people are going to look for, and to me at least it's a little jarring. I'm going to be honest there. There are definitely times where if I'm going from here to here, I'll just kind of go right through there. And, again, I can see benefits on either side, but half stops are a nice safety feature because they keep, if the blade does start to come down, they stop it from going all the way down onto your fingers there. So, that's a thing. Next thing, sharpening on this guy is not as straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and quote an email from the maker themselves about this, saying, "The only way to sharpen tungsten carbide is with a diamond sharpener. It's not easy to do by hand, but you can maintain the edge with a 600 grit diamond sharpener. The factory edge is quite precise, and we will soon have a US-based solution for folks who want to have a Sandrin blade professionally resharpened if required." Now look, one of the benefits of this stuff is that it probably won't come up for a little while. But that is definitely something you want to keep in mind. When you go to a more exotic material like this, and this is true even with your super high-end blade steels, when you go to more exotic materials, you need more exotic sharpening approaches to get to them. That's definitely one downside to these kinds of things. I mean, VG10, for instance, He's not a great performer in terms of edge retention, but it's real freaking easy to keep up with on a very basic ceramic stone, whereas this guy will laugh at ceramic stones. And so you have the advantage of you won't need to sharpen very often, but when you do, it's going to be a bit more of a pain in the neck. Then finally on the bad side, actually not quite finally on the bad side. On the bad side also, it's a little pricey. It's $229. Now look, at some level, for a very small steel slip joint, that's pretty expensive. But the thing is, these folks are literally the only game in town doing a blade like this. That's it, period. If you're just looking for a value in a pocket knife, this might not be the place you're going unless you need that ridiculous edge retention or ridiculous slicitude. Without that particular need, it's not quite as interesting. But I do think that, honestly, I don't know, that price doesn't particularly bother me because they're the only people freaking doing this. And if this is what you're interested in, you're going to end up paying that price. And so I think it's pricey, and I wouldn't want to see that price go any higher, but I don't think that it's a particularly bad deal for you if you're looking for what this is bringing. Then finally on the bad side, the clip on this guy. You can see here that the clip goes straight up there at the end. And this is always a dangerous game. There's a reason that a lot of pocket clips will actually have a flattened off area there. And the reason for that is that as you're gripping this, you will get a little bit of a hot spot off of this clip, digging into your palm right there. It's probably the most unergonomic part of this, and, depending on how you carry it, it's manageable, or how you hold it, it's manageable, but it's definitely something that I'd like to see improved in a future run. It's just to flatten off the end of that clip a little bit there, so it becomes a little bit less of a hot spot. Aside from that, though, the clip is absolutely good to go. And so the clip is definitely could use a flattening up at the top there. That would make things a little bit nicer. And so to me, all of that is the bad, is that the clip could use a flattened area for ergonomic reasons, although the rest of the knife is much more ergonomic than the version 1.0. It is a little bit pricey, but they are the only game in town. Sharpening is definitely it's not ideal. It's something you'll have to work at with this kind of thing. The half stop is more of a half slow. The coating on the handle does seem to wear off a bit. Slip joints themselves are not for everybody. And so, keep that in mind. And then also Tungsten Carbide is a very, specific tool for a specific use here. And if you do anything that requires a lot of toughness, it's not going to be your best choice. On the ugly front, there's only one ugly issue here, and that is right at the very tip of this guy. See that little area right there? See where it looks like it was broken off? Actually, when I got this guy out of the package, having experienced the 1.0 before, which does not have that breakage, when I first got this guy out of the package, I emailed him and said, hey, the knife looks great, but mine came with a broken tip. And the guy emails me back and says, no, that's how it's supposed to be. Yeah, not so sure about that there, buddy. Because the simple fact is that, yeah, sure. I imagine the tip is a very fragile sort of thing, and it would be very easy to break off a Warncliffe-style straight tip like you have on there. But the thing is, the fact that it's going to be easy to break off, well, worst-case scenario, it ends up just as bad as this is. I really dislike that. And especially, there have been a couple of times where I've been trying to use this for utility cutting. Or I've been trying to do draw cuts and things like that, using it to cut Kaizen foam. And it was always weird because the part that contacted the cutting board or whatever wasn't sharpened. And so I kept ending up with these very, very small, thin layers down at the bottom there. I definitely do prefer a straightened tip at the very end there. Even if it is a little bit fragile, let me break it rather than breaking it for me. So to me at least, I very much dislike this broken tip sort of thing. And I hope that in future runs they go on ahead and give us the entire edge that we paid for, so to speak. And so to me at least, I find that pretty ugly, both from a functional perspective as well as from an aesthetic one, and that's the only really ugly thing here. Final conclusion, I think this is a really neat little thing, which is also a very strange little thing. At some level, one of the big differences between this and the 1.0 is that this is a fine little knife. If you don't mind the the two-hand open affair, you don't mind the slip jointy sort of thing, this is actually a pretty solid everyday carry choice. It's very nice to carry. It's got some nice details, a good action with reasonable safety, a whole bunch of improvements since V1, and it does have this magnificent little blade here. Of course, it's not without its downsides. Tungsten carbide is not the material I want for every knife, certainly. A slip joint, and by the way, I'm probably doubting on it. It's probably fine for 90% of people. In fact, it might be really good, but at the same time, it is a very specialized tool. It's not just like a strictly better material. It's just a very different material with a very different set of properties. But anyways, it's probably not, though, the material that everybody wants for a pocket knife, if nothing else in sharpening. It has, the slip joints have some disadvantages, and this isn't a perfect slip joint. The sharpening isn't as straightforward on this guy. It is expensive. The clip is a little bit of a hot spot, and they went on ahead and broke that tip off for you there, which I'm not super a fan of. Look, at some level, I think this knife is mostly a life support system for this blade. This blade is the news here, so to speak. If this knife, for instance, if this blade were S35VN, if this were just a good old-fashioned vanilla S35VN blade, I don't really think this would make much of a splash. It'd be kind of a weird little thing where it's like, hey, you thought about the TCK? And people are like, yeah, I guess. And like some people would be interested. But the fact that they went with this really crazy tungsten thing, that's cool. That makes it, I think, a little bit more compelling. It makes it more interesting, and it gives it a differentiation. It gives it a little bit more of a why factor than a lot of what we see out there in the classical pocket knife market here. Now, don't get me wrong, though. I think this is an enthusiast product through and through. I think, for the most part, the people who are going to be doing this are already going to be knife geeks who are wanting to try something entirely different, who are wanting to try something entirely new. They want something that's out of the realm of normal knife making and something that performs fundamentally differently than a lot of the pieces that they already have in their collection. Particularly if you are a steel snob or a materials person, I can see this being a really interesting choice for you. Something that is reasonably compelling. However, so for those people, this could definitely be a purchase. I can also see a limited set of folks who are really in need of something with absolutely ridiculous edge holding. If you find yourself in a situation where you are constantly using a knife, you want something that is super thin and slicey, and that can stand up to an abrasiveness kind of task that is way above and beyond what most people are dealing with, this could also be a functional choice for you. I can see this being a very good knife for some very specific tasks where that edge holding is valued above everything else. I can see that being a useful sort of thing. However, if you're just looking at the world and going, I want a pocket knife, then, honestly, it's not a bad choice. And particularly, it's almost got a little tiny bit of a gentleman's vibe, although it's certainly hanging a fair amount out of the pocket there for that to be the best approach. But still, I mean, maybe I can see it, but I think for the most part, this is going to be a very, very enthusiast and specialized product. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there's a lot to be said for specialization. I even wrote a whole thing about that on Knife News at one point in time, about the specialists. But anyways, I think it's going to be a really compelling product for a bunch of people. It's definitely a weird product right now, but I think finally it is actually a very nice little pocket knife, and it's something that I would absolutely consider carrying, especially if I had a very weird day of cutting up ahead of me. So anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Sandrin, keep up the good work. This is really, really unusual. It's completely out of left field, but it's cool, and I want to see the envelope pushed, and this is absolutely pushing the envelope. So there you go. Hope this has been interesting. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. I'm just biding my time until the next model. Okay. Have a good one. Bye now.